Right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carl, and I'm from the counseling team. And I have just a real quick bio about me. Um, I retired from everything probably about 4 years ago, and at the same time, we had just purchased a new house. Went through it. I had a bunch of projects to do, so I did all my projects in about that were going to take me a year and a half. I thought I was done in about 2.5 months, and about my third time through Game of Thrones, I thought, what am I doing with my life? What am I going to do here? So met a friend who worked for the counseling team, and she told me that about what they did about going and helping first responders and since I'm a licensed therapist, and I have also was a police officer back. I became a police officer back in the mid '80s. And so back then, this kind of thing with critical incident debriefings and doing therapy with first responders, it just wasn't happening. Not like it is now, that's for sure. And there was a huge stigma attached to it. And so I heard about it. I went down, I started, and for the last 4 to 5 years, I've just absolutely loved it. And like a lot of you might find out that when you retire, that's when you really start your full-time job. And so this has been a blast because as Tony and I were talking about, after retiring, now we get to do our real passion is, and sometimes that's more than a full-time job. And so I've really appreciated it. And I have at this time, the last 4 to 5 years, I look back over my paperwork and everything, and I've done over 300 critical incident debriefings where I was either a participant as a co-leader in it, or I led them with the help of peer support. So I love doing critical incident debriefings. I love going out and being able to meet people and do that sort of thing. And depending upon how many people we had today, I was going to say, hey, well, why don't each of you, tell me your experience with critical incident debriefings? But since there's almost 50 people on, we won't be able to do that. So I see a lot of familiar faces, some familiar names on board. So I appreciate you all having me there. And I am not going to show a PowerPoint today. I'm going to save you from that. But we are going to, I hope that this will be very interactive, because if it's not, we're going to be over in about 15 minutes because that's about all I got to talk about. The most important thing comes from what's been your experience, what have you noticed, and what's going on with you. And if you've never been a part of a critical incident debriefing, don't worry about that, because I have some things to talk about that, and plus you're getting a ton of information from your peers about this in the next several minutes that we're going to be together. So the first thing I would love to do is have several of you unmute yourselves. But by the way, you're all muted, so you're going to have to unmute and then remute yourself. If you would just what kinds of critical incidents have you been on? Don't give too much detail because I don't want to traumatize everybody, but what kinds of critical incidents have you been on? And what reactions have you seen from the people that were participating in a critical incident?
Hey, I'll go if you'd like. Kevin Johnstone from San Diego Fire. I'm chaplain. Been on, I don't have a count. I'm sorry. I lost count probably towards the end of the first year. There's been quite a change in the last even 3 years. A lot of I'm good, we're okay. And I've had some difficult conversations with like a engine company captain saying, no, we're all good. And I look up at the guy in the back seat and I say, why don't you take a look at the guy in the back seat? Because I'm telling you, he ain't good. And then we've kind of pushed to the point where even the naysayers are now welcoming a defusing We're really good at doing defusings. Not as good, I think, at the follow-up debriefings as we should be, but I think we're okay at that, but could improve. And we've gotten everything from multiple fatals in a fire, in fires that involve kids, and anything to do with kids, I think, is a common theme. Any infant death at all, whether it's drowning or being smothered by being in bed with their parents or what have you. Those are really challenging for the firefighters. But now, and especially anybody who's been through the debriefing process, comes out on the back end saying, you know what, I really appreciated that. I thought it was great, and I wish we had this years ago. So I think the tide is turning rapidly. Still a lot of the old school guys that don't want to share, don't want to appear weak, etc. But regardless, and they having the ability at my end, if it's above my pay grade, to kick it to David Bond or somebody at Focus down this way, it has been amazing. And they reports back, even though I don't ask, but they volunteer that that going to Focus was amazing. And I had a battalion chief tell me, you could tell anybody that I went, and feel free to share, or tell me who they are, and I'll go share with them one-on-one. So
Wow.
I think all in all, overall, it's evolved a lot. And the introduction, I'm one of the 4 canine handlers with the crisis response canines, and that brings a whole nother level of our ability to break through to the people in the room.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Pete Diaz?
Hi, let me come on video here so you're not staring at my name. There we are. Hi, good morning. When I was with my last agency, I retired from a big agency. I did 21 years there, currently a sergeant at my second career. So I was at FTO at the time, and we got this call where it was a hotel, and basically the call we got was assist the on-scene security, in-house security. They have a person refusing to leave their room after not paying. So we thought, okay, we had 2 FTOs, 2 trainees. Trainees were going to handle the call, not a big to do. So we get there and we see this on-site security. They step away, and what we saw was not what we expected. There was a guy laying in the bed. He had a knife plunged into his neck. There was blood all over the bed. And basically they said, it's yours. And we basically were just kind of like, what do we do? Needless to say, we handled it the best way we could. And I just remembered my trainee right afterwards said, I guess we clear the call and go back in service. And I was like, hell no. And I said, we got a lot of talking to do first. And I made it a special event because there's a special little place that if you did well as a trainee, you got to go, and he hadn't got to go yet. So I took him to this place that had Hawaiian shaved ice and ice cream and this little hole in the wall. So we start talking and we do our debrief, but then I thought, we need the full team debrief. And that was where things that I didn't even consider come up. It was run by our department's peer support group. And one of the things that struck me as odd was the other FTO started apologizing to me. And I was surprised. I said, why are you apologizing to me? And he said, well, I cut in front of you and I started doing this, and I should have checked with you first because you were the senior person. I was like, dude, I think we were all kind of shell-shocked. I didn't know what to do. You did something, it made sense, so I followed you. It didn't matter who had more seniority. It was who had the right idea at the right time. And then that unfolded a lot of the other things. The trainees thought that they didn't do anything, but they did exactly what we told them to do. So they're beating themselves up, thinking that they were worthless. And I'm like, dude, I told you to go grab that, and you went and grabbed that. That's all that we ask of you at this point. So everybody was beating themselves up thinking that they were failing the other team member, when I thought we actually did a pretty good job handling something out of the ordinary. So instead of walking away with all this trauma, we walked away feeling better about ourselves as officers and as a team. So, I mean, just the difference of just having that debrief right after roll call changed everybody's perspective. Had we not had that debrief, I shudder to think how the younger officers would have continued on in the rest of their training, having that, thinking that they didn't do anything.
Excellent. And thank you so much, Pete. Those who have just joined us, with a question out there is, what kind of critical incident debriefings have you been a part of, and what reactions have you seen from others through the critical incident debriefing process? Somebody else. Go ahead, Jen.
Hey, thanks so much. I'll share the most recent incident that we had, because we actually did the process as it's intended to go, not, oh yeah, oops, we forgot about everyone, let's try to slap something together response. We had a takeover of one of our units within the juvenile institutions, and there was a standoff that lasted all day. We had hostage negotiation teams there from the sheriff's department. There was a lot of, well, you could imagine, right? Especially, I'm looking at Ron here from the sheriff's department. It's, there was a lot, it was a lot of frustrations, a lot of anger happening, a lot of questioning, second guessing, and potential injuries to our officers, who some of them feared for their lives. So when we were able to have the debrief, we had about 20 people attend. And I know there were a lot of questions, and people were really angry. Honestly, there was a lot of anger that was shared, a lot of frustrations, a lot of emotions that came out. And also, I would say at the end, many people shared their appreciation for being able to have this. And you knew that it was just the tip of the iceberg. But having been in law enforcement for 24 years, I recognize now, much differently than before in my early years, the importance of that more early intervention. Just the opportunity for people to talk, to share what their response was, so they feel like they're not alone, to really just get all of their feelings out on the table and not be judged about it. We really just had to almost cut people off because they wanted to talk and talk. So you could see just that there was a real significant need, and that it's hard to do when we're all understaffed. It's hard to, especially institutions. Once again, looking at Ron, they're on like, quadruple overtime or something, but you see the benefit of it and how much it impacted our officers and how necessary it was. It just reminded me that we have to fight to make sure that this happens. So thanks for letting me share.
That's great. Thank you, Jen. Good to see you again. Also, I mean, you brought up a great point, and that is, and I talk about there's a magic that happens in a critical incident debriefing. And for a lot of people, it's getting their questions answered that sometimes they didn't know until they got into a critical incident, like, where were you? How come you weren't there? And then you find out that, all these things happen. And instead of being resentful that they weren't there first, you're going, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this happened. So that's the magic that happens when you start putting all those separate pieces to a puzzle together. So thank you, Jen, for that. Somebody else, what has been your critical incident debriefing that you've been on, and the reactions of the people around you?
Carl, I'll go ahead and go, I guess, if
Hey.
once it goes. It's Kane Johnson, Huntington Beach Fire Department, engineer, also handler like Kevin. It's good to see your face. So we have a handler for our Pure Sport dog. His name's Kingman. And good to see you, Carl. Thank you for all the work you've done with our department in the past. They've definitely been a part of some of our debriefings and diffusings and things that we've needed. My first ever experience with a debrief was prior to Pure Sport being a real big thing in Orange County, at least on the fire side. It was the Salon Meritot shooting, which was the biggest mass shooting in Orange County history, or a guy shot and killed 8 people in a salon in Seal Beach. And we kind of did what at the time I thought was consider a debrief, but actually it was a diffusing because it was happened right after the incident, basically. Well, I shouldn't say right after, but within a few hours after the incident. And it was interesting to see. It was my first time ever participating in anything like that. And there was a big group of us because there's a lot of people that responded to it. And we really kind of got into the weeds of the emotions too. There was some tactical stuff talked about, but also a lot of emotions came up. And it was fascinating to see the varying, I guess, willingness to respond of some of the more seasoned veterans, and surprised that, and impressed and actually inspired by them sharing, because I knew that probably wasn't easy for them. So I thought that was really cool. And so since then, that's been about 10 years. We've had a peer sport team. I've been on it since the inception, about 6 years now. And we've been really active in trying to, really take care of our people and do these diffusings for sure. Like Kevin had alluded to, I think those are really, really important, and probably the one that's most accepted, I think, by our people, because it's not talking about emotion per se necessarily, because you're kind of getting into the tactics of what happened and putting the piece of the puzzle together, which is very helpful and really easy for people to talk about, right? And sometimes emotion does come up and it gets there, but the debrief is always a little bit more challenging, I think. And but like everyone's alluded to already, is that it's changing. There's been a cultural shift, and I've seen that over the years since that first one that I participated in, of people appreciating it, people participating, people I didn't expect to participating in it, even reluctantly. So we've gotten to this point to where it's been really encouraged to, when we have a debrief or a defusing, to really encourage people and create a space to say, hey, even if you don't feel like participating, what you say could help somebody else in here, right? It might make somebody else feel not alone in the way they're feeling or what's going on. And it might help them put the piece of the puzzle together, what happened, and it might help them process this a lot better. So by doing that, I've seen a lot of that's been real effective, and helpful in getting people to not, that maybe wouldn't normally talk, to actually talk, because a lot of people, we're, at least on the fire side, we're team oriented, and we don't want to let one of our brothers or sisters down, right? And if there's a way we can help them through that, we kind of, okay, I can do that, and we'll be able to put that uncomfortable feeling of our emotion and what we want to talk about aside, and kind of say, oh, it's because of them or whatever. It makes it okay because we're trying to help them out, right? Even though it's really effective for them. So anyway, just kind of wanted to say that, and I really appreciate being here, and thank you for taking your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cam. Stephen. Stephen Smoker, go ahead and unmute.
Yep, there we go. Mute
There
button. It's tough, even after 3 years. I'm Stephen Smoker. I'm with the Santa Rosa Fire Department. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have all heard about our fire a few years back at Tubbs Fire. That was a pretty big incident for our agency, as well as most of the members across the state. And so that was we had our peer team in place a little bit before then, about a year before then, but that was a pretty big change for our organization. And how we handled that was basically just a conversation after like an all hands team meeting, less of debrief. And kind of since then, we've realized the need to actually we need to have counselors on staff and start doing more of a debrief thing. So we've had incidents since then, and they've gone more of a an actual CISD or more of a rubric for debriefing critical incidents. So that's helped, and appreciate you guys, and appreciate being here. Thank you.
You bet. Mindy.
Hi, I'm Mindy Wynn. I'm with a Box 21 Rescue Squad in Dayton, Ohio. I apologize. I'm in kind of a stock room, a storage room with bad windows. So I keep my camera off because the light is horrible. But I've also been on several CISM teams, and I worked for the county's Crisis Intervention Center, as well as being involved with the Academy for Traumatic Stress and doing some mostly one-on-one debriefings with people if they've needed more information after the CISM team, or I'm a firefighter EMT. So if someone wants to speak with a peer, I've also got experience with law enforcement, and they don't really want to do it through channels, I meet with them at a coffee shop, or I've met kind of informally, just to chat and just to unofficially debrief, because some people just need to get stuff off their chest. And it's been anything from suicides of a coworker to loss of a baby. We just had tornadoes here. We had a hurricane in Ohio, of all things, but some big things and some small things. And one of the things that I think I've learned from all of these different experiences, and I do teach some crisis intervention, so I throw this in, is a crisis is anything that anyone defines as their crisis. And there are no parameters to what that can be. If someone's cat died and they're a hot mess, that's their crisis.
Mhm.
If someone's bank account is low, that's their crisis. And I feel like regardless of the size of the crisis, everybody has that same feeling of overwhelm. Where do I go? How do I get out of this? And just knowing that there's somebody to hold their hand and get them through that initial step of climbing out of the well, then they have this relief that helps them process what happened. And in my experience, I've described it like people are getting stuck in a well. You can climb into a well or you can fall into a well, but there's no way you're going to get yourself out of that well without someone else bringing you a ladder, throwing you a rope. So if you're willing to grab onto that ladder or grab onto that rope and let that other person guide you out, then you can look back at it and say, whoa, that's where I was. Maybe then make a sign, don't go in the well, to help other people not have that same experience. So everything that a person experiences as a crisis gives them a new gift of empathy. And if we can help them turn that into something that they can use in the future, the crisis doesn't seem to weigh on them as heavy because they are then doing something positive with it. So that's kind of my take on it, is everything, we're all going to experience something really, really bad. What are we going to do with that? And I try to help people figure out what they're going to do with it next.
Great. Thank you, Mindy. Thanks. Let's get one other person, if we can, to share a critical incident and some of the responses you saw.
Hi, I guess I'll go. And I'm not sure if I'm on base, but I am Mary Nell Thrash Bolar. I'm a probation officer 3 with San Bernardino County Probation. We've had 2 suicide of staff and a number of incidents. Our department has done well with the debrief process and also sharing information, answering staff's question, making peer support available. Where we've been using the debrief is on ourselves. The peer supporters, we had Tammy McCoy. She provided debrief to one of our staff suicides because our peer supporters was too close to the situation. Mm-hmm. And she was our doorway to admin. So in our peer support debrief, our coordinator was not there. There was a lot of questions, a lot of hostility. She was able to taper the emotions and provide additional training on wellness for peer supporters. So what we found out is that there is a burnout among peer supporters. And one thing that came out of incidents is the need for funds. So we've overhauled on our fundraising and stuff like that to make things available, because peer supporters felt like, if someone's doing cancer treatment and they're taking them or assisting them because they don't have family, gas money for the staff would help. We can kind of taper around time on the books, but the debrief spread out a number of concerns, paid chaplain. So many issues have came out of just the peer support debrief and staff and things that we needed to overhaul. And it's been extremely productive. We now have Dina Kell. She's been great filling for Dr. Tammy McCoy. And we are working it out and I think making really, really good progress. We have an admin that stands behind our peer support. So I'm watching it flourish. I think my peer support coordinator has been talking to Matt King. It looks like we're going to get a peer support unit where that's all they do. So there's been a lot of growth. I think it's slated for a supervisor 2-3s, and that'll be their permanent job. They've also put in a proposal for K9. So we're developing. We have a large department, and we have 80 peer support members. And I think we're making some strides. But really, in the financial area, we did not realize the need. Recently, I just shared this with you guys. One of our staff, their house fell in the mudslide in the mountains when we had those rains, and his mother and child was swept away. He was able to save his son. I mean, his daughter, but not his son. And one of his canines was missing. One was recovered later. So the immediate need for financial assistance is just a big overhaul that San Bernardino County probation is looking at. And I think we've been doing a really good job. But the debrief for the actual peer supporters has been an awesome caveat, and the need for wellness and things like that, tools and counseling, which is why I'm here, so I can continue to support my officers in that capacity, is one of the main things that we've identified.
Great. Thank you very much. One of the chats came through that Joanna identified that Mindy spoke about something very important. That was when she brought up a good point in defining what crisis is. And basically, what Mindy said is crisis is in the eye of the beholder, because, you know, it's quite common that most of the time when we have a little kid die, we'll have a critical incident debriefing. That's a no-brainer. You know, it's kind of like, because it affects the chances of it affecting most of the people on the team are pretty good. The other thing is, you know what, if you just buried your mom last week and you went on a call, and here's this, you know, and here's this older person died of natural causes, but you know, you had to go out there, everybody's going, yeah, they lived a great life, you know, no big deal, right? But inside you're going, wait a minute, you know, this brings up my mom, and you know, sort of my best friend not being there anymore. That can be a huge crisis for you. And so what I would say to if you're a supervisor, and that is, don't take your team's word for it just because most of them say, you know, hey, this is no big deal, we got this. And you ask any first responder how they're doing, and they'll say great or fine. And so be able to listen to their nonverbal and what's going on too. So great point. All right. One of the, as a peer supporter, if you've been in a critical incident debriefing as a peer supporter, talk about what has been your reactions. Now, when I say your reaction to a critical incident debriefing, there's a couple of things that go with that. There can be a cognitive reaction. In other words, what you're thinking. If you're thinking this is awful, this is horrible, and that sort of thing, that's a reaction. So when we talk about reactions to critical incident debriefing, we want to know what is the reaction that's going on. It can be physical. I mean, you could be on scene to a critical incident, and you could be crying. You could be have that 1,000-yard stare. You could throw up. You could also be frozen. And there are other physical responses, but again, a lot of it is emotional responses. And the emotional responses are everything from anger to sadness. A lot of times it's just sadness and feeling. And for first responders, if you're going to a scene that helplessness and hopelessness are also feelings. So the reactions that you have can be so varied between each member. So in your experience as a peer supporter who has been involved in a critical incident debriefing, and what you saw in the reactions of the participants, what has been the strongest or the biggest reaction you've seen in a critical incident debriefing that someone had? Not necessarily in the debriefing, they could be reacting in the debriefing, but also their on-scene response. What was their biggest reaction of a participant in a critical incident debriefing from you in the eyes of a peer supporter?
Hey, Carl, I can talk if you'd like.
Please do.
I'm sorry. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Matt King, San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office. We're kind of new to this game. We've established what we're calling a wellness and resilience unit. It began in July of 2022. Right now, it's me, and we're gonna hope to add to that soon. So for us, being involved in, we've had some line of duty death things, and we're trying to establish debriefings as more of a way of just doing business at our organization. But I think one of the bigger things that reactions that I've seen is there's people with 20 plus years and have never gone through a debriefing process, and especially our dispatch staff. So I think most times when we have what we call LFEs now, our lethal force encounters, we don't call them OISs anymore. We tend to cater towards what we believe is the involved parties. So meaning the deputies that were the shooters or the witnesses or whatever the case may be, but we tend to forget about kind of the peripheral people. One of the bigger takeaways that I've had and noticing is just their I guess happiness to be included in these things. That's been a big one. And I'll make one more point. I'm learning during these things, stick around for a little bit afterwards, because the last two that I participated in, we've had at least two of our department members come forward later because they didn't want to in the group, and they got something out of it after, we were able to talk to them sort of one-on-one. But those are kind of my two big takeaways right now from actually facilitating some debriefs that we frankly haven't done in a long time. Thank you.
Great, Matt. Thank you. Matt's doing a great job of starting off with a lot of things to do, and it's good to see you, Matt. All right. Somebody else who you can raise your hand and I can call on you, or you can just jump in if you'd like. Just the biggest reaction you've seen in a critical incident debriefing.
I can share if you can hear me.
Yeah, go ahead, Elise.
Okay. So I'm from Mesa, Arizona, the police department. And one of the biggest things that I've seen, and this just happened probably about a month ago. So we had an officer, it was his third officer involved shooting in a 9 months period. And I guess I'm assuming everyone does debriefs, maybe they don't, but I guess just to reiterate how important they are. So we had, the way we do our debriefs is we include the call taker, the dispatcher, and everyone who was on scene and had a part. And then we have a clinician there, and they start with what the call was, and everyone goes around and shares their part in it. And the biggest reaction that I got from the officer who was involved is he didn't share anything. He shared his part when he stepped up and, when he made the decision to fire. That's all he shared, but he was super quiet until afterwards. And the last gentleman who made a good point to stick around is he said, he thanked us for doing this. And he said, the biggest thing that helped him was in hearing everyone's part of the story, because you have these memory lapses. He's like, I didn't know that happened. I didn't know this happened. And for whatever reason, the first officer involved shooting he was in, we did not have a debrief because some people didn't want to. So we respected, they're like, no, this is dumb, we don't want to. Doesn't matter what they say. And that's what I learned. We will do one, because he said he lost like 2 nights of sleep. He couldn't sleep because he kept going back and thinking, what did I miss? what did I not see? What did I see? So by the last debrief, he said he had no issues. He was able to, from the start to the beginning, he had the questions, but all those questions were answered by everyone in the room. So
Right.
it kind of sealed the deal, or, you know, he got the whole picture. And it was just such a relief for him that he said, like, that it was the best. Thank you so much. So that was a good takeaway for me to realize and recognize how important the debriefs are.
Right. Very good. And that's the magic that happens, because it couldn't, you know what? Those things cannot be done in isolation. That's why you need the feedback from other people. That's great. Thank you, Elise. Somebody else. Big reactions you've seen in others at a critical incident debriefing you've been a peer supporter in.
So I'm Ron Slaughter from San Luis Obispo County out here in California. I've been a participant in several debriefs the past year, as well as a peer counselor or a peer supporter assisting with a debrief. I've seen a lot of reactions from anger to people just breaking down, which is kind of shocking, you know, but it helped open the door for everyone else to begin to be a little more genuine. I think the biggest reaction I've seen, though, is relief. We had a double fatal accident recently, and there was a child involved who didn't pass away, but was had a lot of medical injuries. And I know that the officers on scene had no idea what the outcome was, but we did a joint debrief with fire, and they did know the outcome and that the child was doing much better and was actually looking at a full coming back without really a lot of repercussions. And you literally saw the whole room kind of take a sigh of relief and just become a little more at ease. But that's the part of the debrief, you know, without having gotten that information, they're walking around thinking the absolute worst, you know.
I appreciate that. And, you know, one of the, I've seen it go both ways, where somebody wants the information, they get it, and it kind of like fills in the piece of the puzzle, and they can let that go. Especially when it comes to the death of a child. It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen Big Bang Theory, and they talk about Schrodinger's cat. And it's like, when the cat's in the box, the cat's both alive and dead, because we don't know yet. And the problem with finding out some information is if the child dies, but nobody knows about it, in their head, you can go, oh, kid's still alive, and then move on and be okay with it. If they find out that the child has died, though, then it's a whole different critical incident debriefing. So the information that most people get, especially dispatchers, because what happens to a dispatcher, you know, the call comes down, it's crazy, and then all of a sudden the air goes dead for a while, and they don't know what happened or who ended up where, and that sort of thing. And so it's real important that dispatchers be a part of that too. So thank you, Ron, for that. I appreciate that. That's great. Somebody else, the reactions, the big reactions in a critical incident debriefing.
Hey, Dave Bond. This is when I was a peer. It wasn't my debriefing, but I thought it was, well, it was kind of funny to me, but it was also how significant these debriefings can be. Is a guy came in, and at the time I worked for La Mesa PD, it was mandatory that people had to go there. And one of the officers, I think he was a detective at the time, he goes, I don't want to be here. And he goes, well, sorry, you got to be here. And the coordinator, and he goes, well, I'm going to be here, but I'm not going to participate. And he took his chair and put it in the corner of the room facing the wall. And that's how he sat the entire debriefing. And at the end of the debriefing, he came up to the instructor and said, man, that was great. I'm so glad I was here. and so that was one of the, I thought, the powerful things on there, even though he absolutely didn't want to be there, probably because he was told to be there. He still took a lot out of that debriefing. And then I just wanted to reinforce, I've heard it time and time again, both as a peer and as a coordinating these, is exactly, I think, I can't remember if it was Ron or it might have been Pete, that said that, no, it was a fire. I can't remember who it was now. I'm looking at names, that said how valuable it is to reinforce that the things, you may not be affected by this, but what you have to say has a huge impact. And I would almost say I know always and never is a long time, but always something that someone says in a debriefing greatly has an effect to put that piece of the puzzle together. So I just want to reinforce that from both a peer and a coordinator.
That's great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Good. Thank you, David. Somebody else.
Carl, you okay if I
Yeah, jump in, Tony.
We did a critical incident debriefing after the conception incident, where we had the people on the dive boat out at the islands catch fire, and a lot, and people died. And afterwards, working with the Coast Guard, we did a debriefing for one of the ships that brought in the FBI team that did most of the body recovery. And totally out of my element, I'm a firefighter, but working with a ship crew, and we did it on the ship, so it was kind of tight quarters, and good crowd. But we had one individual that was just completely shut down when we tried to fit everybody into one room, and he goes, he sat in a different room, but he was looking through kind of a window, kind of just listening. And it took a long time. And as we went around the room and did the debriefing, everybody was fairly stoic and stuck to what they did, stuck to what they were feeling. There was a little bit of emotion. And, the first time around, this individual was like, no, I'm good, pass. Second time around, no, I'm good, pass. And then at the end, when we kind of went around to check in, it was kind of like, all right, let's see how everybody's doing. We're going to break for lunch. And this individual finally got up. He moved into the rooms, and he gave one of the most powerful, I don't know what you would call it, but just one of the most powerful things I'd ever heard. And he just laid it out there. But it took well over 2 hours for him to feel comfortable. And when he did, that opened up the whole room. When he spoke, then all of a sudden the emotions kind of rolled out of everybody. And we ended up going longer, but it was all, never give up. Patience, don't force it. But man, that was kind of one of the things I learned. It was just kind of, all right, we're going to give you your space. And when you're ready, we're gonna allow you to come in, and it was the most powerful thing I'd seen in a debriefing, where someone went from so closed to so open, and really it just influenced the whole group, his actions. So that there was a lot learned, and a lot came out of that. So that's my story.
That's great. Thank you, Tony. Someone else. Some of the strongest reactions you've seen to people during a critical incident debriefing. Okay.
Hi, Kane Johnson again, Huntington Fire. Kind of reiterate something what Tony just shared too, was we had something that was a little different. It wasn't quite like wouldn't call it a debrief from horror diffusing, but when we helped out with the LA County fires, murder suicide that they had, a lot of us went up and did station visits with the local stations that were helping out with the incident and were affected by it. And we had a group at this one station. It was a pretty intense station. I was in there with the LA City firefighter and myself, and there's always an LA County, LA City fire kind of, machismo, beef with each other all the time just for fun. And we go in there, and it's a pretty big house with really prideful younger people, go-getters, and they're just sitting there, arms crossed, just staring at you, and we're just going, hey. And obviously it was a very intense call, and there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of anger for many reasons too. And I remember, because it wasn't super formal, we had one of the guys that was at that station was really well respected and was off duty on injury. And he just happened to come into the station while we're doing this around the kitchen table, right? And everybody lit up and was like, oh my gosh, good to see you, all this stuff. And he goes and he sits down, and we kind of go back to the same thing. Everyone's kind of like not really wanting to talk and doing their thing. And we start talking about, some things to do like therapy and things after these incidents, and just, giving a bunch of things to the resources and whatnot. And he just opens up about his problems with alcohol abuse and substance abuse, and how he's gotten a lot of help through therapy and all this stuff. And then, just like Tony said, all of a sudden everyone's like, I'll talk. Okay, let's talk about arms become uncrossed and all that stuff. And so I think one of the reminders for all of us that are on peer support, it might not be something that's, new to you, or you might already know this, but like when we're involved, for sure, we can be influential if we're involved in the debrief process, maybe not as a peer, just as a participant, or whoever that might be that is maybe influential or unexpected to talk. It's important that we take that opportunity too, even if you don't feel it, because you don't know what it's going to do to the rest of the group. And if you can be that catalyst to a conversation, even if you feel uncomfortable, again, for us as a peer, we're not perfect. There might be times we're involved in something we don't want to talk about, something, or it might be standoffish. It's a good reminder to do that. And then in those groups, like Tony said, keep pushing forward, and figure out a way, do some of that like verbal jujitsu, to try to figure out how we can get somebody to kind of open up, what question to ask, or how can we maybe say something that might be a good time for us to relate in what we say, right? How can we relate to this incident or these people, that might spark a comfortableness for someone to be able to speak up and talk, because it's very, very powerful when that happens. And it's all of us in here that are peer supporters like this have probably been in the room where it's been like that, and you're like, oh, so much better now. Everybody's had this opportunity, and we feel like we're making progress, and people are benefiting from it. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Kim.
I got something to bring up, which I just was reminded of listening to all this. It's funny how even years later, if the critical incident was so major, there's still things that people could still feel. I retired Sacramento Police in 2017, did 21 years there. And there was an incident in the late 90s where one of our young, very popular officers got killed, and his partner survived. And it was a huge thing. Officer Bill Bean, when he died. And so fast forward, I want to say 2010, and one of the ladies I was academy staff officer, and one of the females was out on pregnancy leave, so they brought her in over at the academy staff, and we knew her from years, so it was nice homecoming, and we just got to chatting. And the academy commander at the time was Bill Bean's partner, and my friend, she had said, I still get a little emotional thinking about it. She starts telling me how she doesn't think that he likes her because of what happened at Bill's shooting. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she said, and they had a debrief, and this was never brought up, but she had been one of the first people on scene giving. Let me back up a little bit. This all opened up when I said, hey, you want to go grab some Mexican food? And she goes, I don't eat Mexican food. And she said it so empirically, like I was kind of shocked because her husband was Hispanic. And I go, what do you mean you don't eat Mexican food? And she goes, well, ever since Bill died. I said, what do you mean? So she tells me the story how she was giving Bill mouth to mouth. And apparently Bill had Mexican food prior to that event. And so he was throwing up in her face. And she said that she would just smear, she said it was all over her hair. She would just wipe it off, and she would just keep going. And I had never heard this. And she said that she thought Dave was upset because she didn't save Bill. And I said, whoa, I guarantee you that's not how he feels. I don't think he even knows about that. So I brought them together, had them do a sit down meet. And, it's amazing years later after a critical incident debrief that things still come up that are still, people are carrying around their necks and need to work through. So it's sometimes you just got to be aware of when those opportunities arise to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. Thanks. And several of the comments in the chat are leaning towards, you know what, people are going to talk when they're ready. And some of them do in the critical incident debriefing, and some will do afterwards. But again, there's magic in that critical incident debriefing, and sometimes it doesn't get started until that happens. Was a great your example, Pete, was really great about that's a huge reaction to a critical incident debriefing. Someone stopping, they don't eat Mexican food anymore because of something that happened in the incident. And that's the kind of reaction that's really big. And that's the kind of reaction, if somebody's still having, they probably need more help with it. And possibly need to go to a therapist and to talk more about it. But a lot of times it's going to be the follow-up, which could be weeks or months later. And as a peer supporter, that's a good thing to do, is to follow up with a crew or a team that was part of a critical incident, and just go see how they're doing individually or as a group, with that particular incident. So great feedback, Pete. All right, got a new question for you here, and this is sort of this is coming out from sort of a blind side on you, but this is really important for peer supporters doing critical incident debriefings, and that is when you're in as a peer supporter doing a critical incident debriefing, there's the responses that everybody has both in the room and their on-scene response, and in the room during the critical incident debriefing. But what also is really important is what has been your reaction to being in a critical incident debriefing. A debriefing, of course, with an incident that you weren't a part of, but what has been your reaction? How have you reacted to other people reacting? And I can tell you that there are times in a critical incident debriefing, most of the time it goes along, and I don't have much of an emotional reaction, but there have been a few where I will be in as the therapist sitting in the room, listening to people talk, and I'll start tearing up. And it's a reaction that I have. And a lot of times it's because I'll have one first responder telling another one, I love you, and you're the most important, person out there for me, and I needed to be there with you. And I'm sorry you had to go through this. And just the one of the things that triggers me is the love one man has for another, who out of their respect for one another, out of their friendship and their closeness. And that has been something that I react to. So what I want to ask you is what has been some of your personal reactions being a peer supporter when you hear and when you're with others?
I'll go if you want to, Carl.
Please go
Sorry,
ahead.
I'm talking a lot, but I love this discussion that we're having. This is fantastic. I agree with you. For me, for sure, 100%. It's the overwhelming empathy that gets me a lot of times, especially when it doesn't matter if I'm obviously if I'm doing something, fire related, versus a law enforcement debrief or whatnot. But regardless, it doesn't matter, because like you say, that emotion, you feel it, we're all connected, and you can just imagine what they're going through, right? So that's a big one. The other one is sometimes I have this overwhelming desire to encourage, right? And we try not to talk too much in there, right? And interject when you feel it's necessary or appropriate or helpful, right? Which can always be hard to figure out when and how much. But yeah, when you see people that are beating themselves up, for maybe they think they didn't do something or didn't do enough or whatever. And you're like, pardon my French, we're like, bullshit. You didn't have, in your mind, you're like, you did enough. Of course you did, you want to encourage. So there's that overwhelming sense of you want to, if you validate their emotion, it's okay to feel that way, but be like, I also want you to not beat yourself up, and try not to invalidate at the same time, but yeah, for me though, the biggest one is definitely the tearing up, because I'm like, oh, this isn't about me. Don't try not to, make it too much. And I'll even get like that on calls sometimes, it's
Yeah.
a lot, especially more. I'm 18 years on, and I found that more happening more often now than it did earlier on in my career. As life builds up, you just have more experiences and more, ways to relate and empathize with people. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I know for me, I get, I'm a big mush. The older I get, the bigger mush I had. I thought I had a heart of stone until, once I passed 60 and heading into 70 now, it's like, what? I don't care. I don't care what you people think. And sometimes I'll tear up at these things, and it's just like, and because there's a lot of weight in the room, and it can be positive or negative, and or hurtful emotions too. But Kane, you're what you said about how you are in the room and wanting to be an encourager, that's actually a good thing. I mean, you use the compassion and the empathy that you have, and you go, no, that's bullshit. And that's, what? That's what peer supporters do. Because you can see that the first thing is, when you're in a critical incident debriefing, can you normalize? Can you normalize what they're experiencing? Yes, all good first responders are going to kick their own butts harder than anybody else can. And so some of the work we have to do is go in and unkick their butt for them, and by encouraging them or telling them the truth. No, for instance, I can't tell you how many I've been on with fire where an engineer has made the wrong turn or got stuck on the road or something like that, and they think, oh my God, this kid died because I wasn't, because I took an extra 45 seconds to get there. And having everybody else go, no, man, this kid was gone before you got there. Just ease up and ease up. It's okay. And as a peer supporter, especially with the experience you have, perfect. I mean, that's what we're there for, is to give that. So great, Kane. Thanks. I appreciate it. Anybody else? Your reaction. See, now things, when we're talking about other people's reaction, we give that up pretty quick, but your own personal reaction, the therapist and the cop in me, I see you out there, even though your screens are off and you're having lunch, when I don't get to have it right now. But I can see it. I can see you out there. What's happened?
I can go if you'd like.
Kevin, go ahead.
Kevin from San Diego Fire. I'm a chaplain. I've had a couple instances where I've gotten angry, and angry that we didn't have these programs in place years ago. And shortly after, I think I'd just been issued my uniform. So at the time, and we went to a prayer breakfast, and one of the speakers was a recently retired lieutenant from San Diego PD. And as it turned out, he was first on scene at the McDonald's massacre in San Ysidro, which is over 30 years ago, might be 40 years ago. And it was on the cover of Life magazine, kneeling down over a deceased child. And you could tell, well, first off, he said, I have never talked about this before. And I was like, well, what the heck is wrong with the system? And he, and throughout regurgitating the incident, he was fighting it the whole time. And you could hear his throat was closed up, and he was really trying to get the words out. And I'm thinking, for 30 or 40 years, this guy has been struggling with this. And I've also had to suppress that anger on my face, even when somebody, an individual, pulls me aside and says, I'm so glad this is here now. A couple of years ago, I had an incident and it really bothered me, but nobody called for peer support or chaplains. Nobody called for a defusing. And at that point, all you can do is say, I'm awfully sorry. Things are changing. Things have changed. And, but inside I'm like, man, that's so bad. So, you know, the opportunities that they have today, and you hear it over and over again. I'm sure everybody on this call has heard it over and over again as they've been out there. You know, that we've come so far in just a few years to make this available, and the support that we're giving for their emotional and spiritual well-being has been remarkable and is being well received.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Great. Somebody else, your response, your personal response in a critical incident debriefing. Tom, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Carl. Hey, everybody. Here, I'll lower my hand real quick. Yeah, so I think, so I have a different one, sort of similar to what everybody said. You know, I'm not a monster. Everybody gets sad. Everybody, you know, you kind of get teared up during these things. When I first started doing this, I should say, Tom Flourish. I'm from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Inspector General's office. I'm a federal agent based out of D.C. I run our peer support team. So we're a pretty young team, maybe 5 or 6 years. We started off with a team of 2 people, and now we're at about 12, and we handle about 600 people nationwide, 600 law enforcement and support nationwide. So yeah, you know, when I first started this, you know, like I'm in the, you know, in a debrief or something like that, I'm trying to be, you know, that strong, silent, you know, nodding my head or, you know, whatever, deep thought. And you realize, like, trying to be detached. So, you know, you don't want to be bawling all over everybody. You're supposed to be that strong one. But then you realize, like, hey, it's okay to tear up. It's okay to be sad. It's okay, you know, all this stuff. But that's not really the one. I think a lot of people experience that. For me, as I'm going along here, I have this weird thing. I feel proud and happy at these because I see our evolution, and I sit there and I'm like, I almost want to smile, but obviously it's weird to be the guy who's smiling when you're talking about a horrible event or something that's, you know, been so bad for people. But you almost want to smile because you see people all of a sudden, like the first time, I think Kane was the one who said, you know, before, people sitting there with their arms crossed and, you know, that stern look on their face, where you watch and all of a sudden it's like, you don't have to spark this thing. People just know it's time to share, and they want to share, and they want to be involved. And then I watch my younger peer supporters coming on board and them getting involved and doing the right thing. And I have this, like, you know, this fullness of pride and happiness. And you're sitting there in a debrief, and as strange as it sounds, you're happy and you're proud of your people and your peer support team and seeing what they're doing. And I just want to mention that because for me, it's always that weird thing because I'm sitting at a sad event, but inside, like, you know, I'm kind of torn inside. So it's just one thing that's always gets to me and then afterwards you have this, like, unload of a lot of emotions. You're not just sad, you're happy, you're sad, you're proud, you're angry, you're all this stuff. So it's just this, like, you know, just total unloading of emotions.
Yeah. That's so perfect, Tom, because I mean, seriously, sometimes inside I'm going, yes, he did, you know, especially if you could see the one holdout, you know, this old codger, this guy who's been around, who is, you know, they're not going to open up, and then they open up. It's like, you're going, yes, yeah, you know, you want to just stand up and go, all right, now we're going. And so, yeah, sometimes, you know what, and that's, you know what, when I go there, and when I'm part of a critical incident debriefing, that's my passion. When I get that feeling like they connected, they did it, they're helping one another, and the magic happens. And so, and that's when my passion is just, you know, is fired up. So that's great. Thank you, Tom. Somebody else, your reaction to a critical incident.
Hey, it's Jen with San Diego Probation again. And I can say that I have a little bit of a combo. Like, I have a sampler platter from what people have shared. There's definitely part of me that's really proud to feel like, yes, we're getting this going, to the frustration piece, the, you know, finding myself almost judging people's responses when that's like, not why we're not here. But again, it's just the noticing. I'm not acting on that at all. But I definitely have found, like, a happy place somehow. Maybe it's having enough experience doing these often enough where I don't get taken over by an emotional sense of overwhelm, mostly. But sometimes it's just that thing, that time that hits you. And I actually think that benefits the people who are there. If they see you as a real human with real emotions, someone who's vulnerable, particularly, I mean, they're used to it with me, right? but maybe not with some of the other folks here on the calls. Are like, man, that person hasn't shed a tear since, I don't know, he came out of his mother's womb, right? Maybe that for some folks, that's going to be more impactful. But I think a lot of the reaction that I had was again, just a sampler platter, sometimes being frustrated. I can't believe we haven't really done these enough, but really this sense of like, just so grateful to be there, to be a part of this, and noticing that people, there's some frustration that people are on their phones a little bit and wanting to tell them like, put it down so people aren't worried. But for some people, they need that sort of distraction in order to feel comfortable. So it's like this balance of finding comfort in an uncomfortable place and knowing that you're there for the right reason. And that's kind of where I'm at. And we'll see, it might be different next time, but that's at least my most recent memory.
Jen, and that's perfect, because sometimes I've been in and I've experienced a wide range in the same critical incident debriefing, with somebody being distracted, leaving the room. Then how many of you have been part of think about it this way. One of the things that I've seen is what happens to the peer supporters that I'm working with. And one of the participants that they know is usually this guy that won't stop talking, and he'll start telling one of his stories. And I have seen peer supporters just, and they're pretty good. They don't roll their eyes, but you could tell they're rolling their eyes inside when this guy starts talking. And that's a reaction to what's going on. When you go, oh, so-and-so's not going to start telling a story again. And they do, because that's what they always do. And, and the part about judging. Yep. We judge too. But and you know what? It's going to be natural for us to judge, because that's what sort of the things that people do. However, can you judge and still do the job? So that's perfect, Jen. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. One of the things that happens when you do these critical incident debriefings, and you do so much giving, and you're sitting there and you're taking it all in, one of your reactions can be vicarious traumatization, which means that the mere fact that you're sitting there, even though you weren't on the call, listening to it, it can cause you to react, to have an internal reaction and trigger. And a lot of times for most of us, it's because you can relate easily to what the person's saying. You've been on calls yourself just like that. And perhaps you've been on a call that didn't go well, or that you're still working with, and you get triggered. And that's a reaction also. As a peer supporter, you can get triggered just like they are, even though you didn't go on the call, because it brings up stuff from your past. And so that with vicarious traumatization, and with just being able to connect, empathy, and like so many of you have talked about, that takes energy. It takes a lot of energy to deal with. So my question to you is, and we're going to end on a different question, and then I'm going to take questions. We'll take questions from each other for everything. But what do you do to take care of the stuff built up inside of you? Because obviously, after a critical incident's over and you're there, you don't want to be talking to the participants about how hard that was for you, because that's not appropriate. So what do you do? It's debriefing the debriefer. So what do you do to take care of your own buildup of reactions after you do peer support, especially with a critical incident debriefing? Kane, I'm just going to call on you when I finish. As soon as I finish a question, I'll just call. Kane, go ahead.
Yeah, and yes, that's a bird on my shoulder. Sorry,
Yes.
It's my wife's bird. Her name is Pepper. I don't know, but she's new. She's cute. But anyway,
Or
she's been off screen for a while.
Or Pepper has a human under her. That's
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, I can't believe she climbed up for this. That's fun. Anyway, yeah, I'm a freaky bird guy. Apparently, it's my wife's, I promise, but I love her too, so it's great. Anyway, yeah, for me, my wife's a therapist, so she's a marriage and family therapist. So I'm very lucky in that regard, in that we can debrief together. You know, she's really good about hearing me out when I feel necessary, and I need to do that. And I do take her up on that quite often. I do also do my own therapy too, through Counseling Team International, right? My therapist works through Counseling Team. And so I do take the opportunity to meet with her, probably try to do it once a month at a minimum, just to keep that going. And there might be times I go in there, I don't even know what I'm going to talk about, and stuff just comes up. So I try to just do a regular checkup. And then, you know, if there's something more critical, I'll make it more consistent. And then for me, it's being active too. I love just getting out and about. So our peer support dog, Kingman, you know, he's a very active dog. So we like to go out. So just go out with him. And then I surf a lot, or do anything about water. I surf, I paddleboard, I do all kinds of stuff in the ocean or any body of water. There's that connection that we all have as humans with the ocean, or with a river, a lake, pool, it doesn't matter. It's so unique and so incredible. So just kind of go out and get lost in that. Even if I don't even catch waves, it's just nice to be floating around out there and feel weightless. So the weight of the world isn't on you anymore, kind of thing. So that's kind of what I try to do.
Great. Thank you, King. Hey, Pete, what do you got?
Kane, I'm totally jealous. I grew up in Southern Cal. I'm nowhere near the beach, and I miss the beach every day. One of my big things that helps me, because of the immediacy, is I will throw on my Netflix or stand-up comedy on the way home, and just being able to laugh just takes that edge off, so that when I come home, I'm not accidentally spilling it out onto my family, whatever toxicness, like toxicity I took from the group, or whatever from the teams. That's probably been the biggest thing for me, is I've used working out and all that, the other traditional methods of decompression, and that's helped. I almost forgot, Wim Hof breathing and cold showers, ice baths on occasion, but the breathing has been phenomenal. I can't stress that enough.
Absolutely. Great, Pete. Thank you. Somebody else, what do you do to take care of, you know, all the stuff that gets built up from being a good peer supporter? Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually this is a question I hadn't really considered. We've done quite a few last year, and now as a supervisor on the team, it kind of puts it back in perspective. I got to make sure that, you know, my people are aware of what it is they're walking into, and, you know, making sure that they're keeping healthy as they, you know, after the debrief itself. We typically, after a debrief, the peer supporters and the counselor will typically hang out for a bit anyways, to see if anyone has anything else they want to say after everyone leaves. But then we'll kind of debrief it amongst ourselves a little bit also. And I think that's helpful in that sense. But you're right, most people that are drawn to peer support tend to have been through their own experiences already. I was a coroner for 2.5 years, and it's interesting, you hear these stories and like a lot of other things start to come up again also. But I think like making the intentional effort to, okay, I'm going to go outside and go do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to, you know, go out and take my camera and do some photography, or, you know, making those purposeful choices to go out and do something afterwards.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Ron. Somebody else, what are you doing to, you know, to take care of yourself, that self-care?
So I will say, me working in probation, my husband is a sergeant for Southgate PD. So it's very important. My department has our once a year training is probably our reminder in December. Counseling team puts on an annual training that we do, but they also talk about wellness is really big amongst peer supporters. So on that day, if I haven't done it, I schedule something and remember to have the conversation with my husband about it as well, because our household, you can imagine two of us, two high strung people in the household, is much needed. So we try to remember to take some adult time for each other and just kind of like reflect and things like that. So a vacation, I put it on for a week on my calendar. So I have planned a trip for, I think it's somewhere in Mexico. I did it at Hey, Rail's my husband's Christmas gift. So we'll be going in November to a trip. But date night once a week.
Good. Good for you. Yeah. Excellent. Somebody else.
Yeah, I think on the way back, whether it was being a clinician or peer, but mainly as clinician driving there, just kind of I do a check on myself and see what I missed, and it seems like I always miss something, and just kind of go over what I could have done better after kind of the debrief with the peer supporters and the chaplain. Most of the time we do that, and then how to really take care of myself. I reconnect with my missus. We don't really talk about the debriefing, but reconnect with her on just seeing how we're doing, and maybe some gratitudes on the treadmill. And then once or twice a week, I get out there and chase that little black puck around on the ice, and not very good at it, but I am doing my, I call it my happy place, an hour that I'm only thinking about that. And I encourage all my clients to do same or similar, something at least once a week that you do solely for yourself. It can involve other people, but boy, is it all of a sudden I sit on the bench, waiting for my turn to get on, and nothing else is going on. It's very nice to be living in the moment. So however I can be in the moment is very helpful. And I gotta say, man, I appreciate. I was just listening to this training. I'm like, I think this is gonna be good for us and the other clinicians, just to kind of hear from peers. But boy, the tears, holding the tears back during the session, and also the pride. I don't know if I'd call it pride. Just the humbleness of being with first responders and seeing what they go through and what they have to witness and what they have to do and how it affects them. You just can't. I'm humbled to be able to be in a part of that in any way, shape, or form. So the people that spoke today, I really appreciate. I really appreciate you sharing, because it really hit my heart today. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, David. I want to talk just a few seconds about peer support and critical incident debriefings. One of the things, the unfortunate thing is about probably 80% or better of the 300 or so critical incident debriefings I've done over the past 3 or 4 years, 80% there's no peer supporter or chaplain present, and that's unfortunate. But when I do get to be there and there is a peer supporter there, I just want to give some tips about how to be a great peer supporter in a critical incident debriefing. Now, some of you obviously are, and I can just tell by what you're relating, you are. But I wanted to sort of from an outside perspective, let you know that there are some things you can do to make my job easier. And that is, there is a huge difference between doing a critical incident debriefing for fire versus police. When I go into fire, I've walked into many fire stations, and usually as soon as I walk in the door, the guys and gals are coming up, they're shaking my hand, they're introducing themselves, they're saying hi, and they're taking me to the kitchen table, and we're all sitting around and we're talking, and I'm offered coffee and stuff. And then the contrast that with when I do one at a police department, like a regular police department, I'll come in, it's like, okay, fat guy, all right, bald guy, impress me. And they don't know who I am. They don't know who I am. I'm a stranger, so all of their hackles are up and paranoia is up. This guy, we don't know who he is, and he's in our land here. And when I go in as a peer supporter, you could do a huge favor for me by going in and kind of loosening up the crowd before I get there and introducing me once I do get there. When I do get there, come up and introduce yourself as a peer supporter, because if you're a peer supporter there, I won't, especially if you're in uniform, I won't know you're a peer supporter. So when I get there, just say, hey, I'm your peer supporter today. I'm going to help out in peer support. It's like, great, awesome. And usually what I'll ask is, what do you want to do? And a lot of peer supporters, unfortunately, what they do is they sit there and don't do anything. And they listen and they're there and they're supportive. But a couple things you can do is greet them as soon as they come in. Introduce yourself to me so I know who you are so we can talk. And then introduce me to the people in the room. There's something about when I get to, especially with a cop, if I can shake their hand, look them in the eye, say hi, and then and you're the kind of bridging that relationship gap, which helps with the rapport, my rapport with them, and it gets things moving a lot faster. The other thing is, at least when I do critical incident debriefings, I like it when you guys talk throughout it instead of waiting until after or talking before. Talk throughout it. If you have feedback to give somebody, like Kane was saying, you know, BS, that's not true. You did this, you did that, you know, say it, do it. And throughout the whole thing, don't wait until the end because the moment will pass. So if you have something to say or something you want to share, or you want to relate that you've been through some of the same thing, that's what you're there for. Because most of the time, I can't relate to what they're going through. Either if I'm doing fire, I can't relate to being a firefighter, but you can. And so whatever department or whatever whoever you work for, you can relate. And so relating throughout the whole thing, don't wait till the end. And there's a part in there, if you remember critical incident debriefings, there's a part where we talk about reactions. That's when you can normalize their reaction, the participant's reaction, by you saying, yeah, I went through the same thing. Okay, that normalizes it, and that makes it good. The other time is when we're talking about coping skills. What do you do? How do you know, when you get home from this, what are you going to do to take care of yourself for this critical incident? And some of the self-care that you do is what you would share during that time. And lastly, and I think some of you have already mentioned it, so I'm going to highlight it and pounce on it here, is when it's over, don't run away. When it's over, stick around. When it's over, and that's why, and I'm going to add this to it. I can't tell you how many times I go into to do a critical incident debriefing, and I'll ask, hey, can we, do you guys have any tissue? And they're looking at each other, tissue. And so there have been, and my hand to God, here we go. They will go into the restroom and pick out those rectangular towels that, you pull up, and they will bring those. I've seen a whole roll of the big roll things that go on the toilet rolls, and toilet tissue. So if you could, please, get a couple of boxes of tissue, spend $5 and get a couple of boxes of tissue. Every time there's a critical incident debriefing, please bring tissue. And it's good to have water there too, because one of the things we focus on is, hey, cleanse it out, get the water out. So please do that. If a Margaritaville machine was the thing to bring peace and calm, I would say do it, but that's not a good thing, because I know what people will put in it. So, but you have to bring the minimum, which is bring tissue in a box and water if you can. The little ones are fine, and distribute those, because a couple things happen. One is when you're in a critical incident debriefing and someone starts to tear up and someone just slides the tissue in front, that's great. The other thing is there's something about offering somebody water that's also kind of breaks down some of it. And thirdly, I'd say if you can afford it, if you want to, if your department's okay with it, have food available afterwards, because that's, what, there's been a saying every place I've ever worked, when we meet, we eat. And there's something about the collective, let's sit around, let's eat. And by having something to drink and something in your hand to eat, it keeps people there. And you will be amazed at what people won't say in a group, they'll say to you off to the side. And the beauty is, if when we finished critical incident debriefing, we're standing around, we're talking and chatting, and there'll be a total, it'll be filled with BS too, and that's okay. But if you find somebody who's still sort of reacting, that's the time to, hey, let me take you over to Carl. Let's go talk to Carl. And you just bring me over, introduce me, and say, so-and-so is having, still having some stuff. And I'll stand there and talk with them. Or I'll take them to the side and talk to them about it. And then, you got a therapist there. You might as well, what I tell when I teach peer support for basic peer support and advanced peer support, I'll tell you this, what I teach them. The first thing I say is, let the therapist do the heavy lifting. Don't you try and do the healing and all that stuff. Let the therapist do the heavy lifting. And so bring them over to me. I'll do it. Bring them over to me. I'll talk to them. And the other thing is, make sure that if you have a chaplain there and the chaplain is maybe new to that shift, that you introduce the chaplain too. Those are some things that really, really help move critical incident debriefing along and help bookend it and make it a really good experience for everybody. The last thing I'd say is, if you're a peer supporter, and of course you've gone through basic peer support, take an advanced course in peer support if you can. But also, the other thing is, take a CISM training, a critical incident stress management training. And I love it when I go in and the peer supporter goes, no, I'll run the thing. Why don't you talk about the reaction part? Why don't you do this, or why don't you do that? And I've been in several of them where the peer supporters run the critical incident debriefing. I don't have to. Matter of fact, I prefer it when the peer supporter does, and that's because they know you better than they know me, and they will respond to you better than they respond to me. So please take a CISM course and go through it and make it something. If you're really interested in critical incident debriefings, make it yours and run it. Start from the beginning, enter the introduction, and go through all the questions through the model that we use, and you'll do great. And don't forget to debrief afterwards with the therapist and the chaplains and each other about, once everybody's gone, say, okay, how did that go? What can we do better? And that way, the next time it can only get better. So that's my little teaching for today and my little talk. So I want to open it up now to any questions, comments, concerns, or rebuttals that you have. And so we can finish on a good note about making sure that you get all your questions answered. This is where you talk.
Thanks, Carl. Carl, I just want to thank you. I mean, great stuff. And everybody that's contributed and engaged, thank you for sharing and opening up. And you kind of I had this question in my head for the last 20 minutes, and you kind of hit it right at the end. And that's clinician-led, peer-led. There's always some conversation of who does what. And it's nice to hear that you do support a peer-led debriefing. But I think that the big thing that I've seen or heard or learned is every debriefing is different. The peer may or may not be comfortable, and it may fall on you, or the group may be more comfortable with you than the peer, or they may be more comfortable with the peer than you. So I think that's one of the things, is just to keep, when you go in, is keep an open mind. But really, the conversations, like let's say you and I were going to do a debriefing this afternoon, the more you and I could talk prior about the call or the incident, your experience, my experience, and kind of an overview of the group. Are they the generation that accepts? Are they not the generation that accepts? Do they trust an outsider? Would they be more trusting with you? So I think that's where a lot of the, we, especially in the fire service, we want to do everything the same every single time. I mean, we throw ladders the exact same time. We say the exact same thing on the radio, and if we don't, we get in trouble. So for us to go into a situation like a debriefing and not have a black and white script, it's hard for us. And so I think that's so for you to finish on a note that we have to be flexible and work together, that really, I don't know, I took a lot out of that, and that was comforting for me to know that there are different ways of doing it. It's really so we are going to rely on you for your input on how do we best do this.
Right. And you know what? Most of the time I end up doing it because that's what they feel most comfortable with, and that's great. But like I've said, this if it's peer-led, chaplain-led, doesn't matter. It usually works out really good. And I'll take a back seat to a peer supporter anytime, because the first line of defense is the peer supporter, then it's the chaplain, and then you do a Hail Mary pass and hope a clinician comes in that can do something. So I really support peer-led and chaplain-led critical incident debriefing. So good, thank you, Tony. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Hey, Carl, I just saw Mike Lawson's question, and he was asking, because he can't speak right now, when is the best time to have a debrief? And I think that's a good one. And it also goes with the law enforcement answer, it depends. But I am curious to hear what you would have to say about that.
Well, what I would say is that's difficult, because one of the things I found with the fire service, and sometimes with law enforcement too, is that with the fire service, typically it's happening before their shift ends. And that's because some people are getting those people back together again sometimes is near impossible, because they have, as everybody pretty much can experience, that there's so much overtime and people are coming from different houses to come in and help out, and and getting them all together be near impossible. So sometimes it's the day of, sometimes I've done a week after. And there was a couple rare instances when it was actually a month or so afterwards, but still had one. I think that I heard one time somebody say it's good to have a couple of sleep cycles in between, if you can. But a lot of times, you know what, you'll never get these people back in the same room again. So it all depends. So if you can do it, probably the next day or the day after. But usually I can't tell you how many times I've done officer involved shootings or critical incidents, and it's their Friday and they're not going to be back for several days, or somebody's going on vacation for several weeks. So that's very difficult, but it's a good question. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I would say it's a challenging question. And what he was saying is that he usually asks the supervisor when's good, and they sometimes are asked to come back or wait until they have days on. And I can say, at least for this last critical incident stress debriefing, we had a tactical debrief, or more like a town hall, because people were really just wanting to talk about this incident that we had. But it kind of ripped off the wound, it ripped off the bandage and reopened the wound. And we had scheduled our debrief for after that had happened. And I think that's something to consider. Obviously the sleep cycles and the days off and all that stuff is juggling, sometimes a bit of a nightmare. So usually a weekish is kind of helpful. But I know that it's important to have some of those other considerations too. And it sounds like they were talking about, and that's what Kevin's talking about here, clarify the difference between a diffusing and a debriefing, because if you're doing a diffusing, like when you're talking about fire being, that sounds like to me, it might be more of a diffusing, but I'm not quite sure. I'm still new to all of this comparative to many of you. So I'm curious as well.
So sort of the town hall thing you were talking about sounds like sort of like a diffusing. And a lot of times you start with the diffusing, and if you know that there's still a lot of emotion and reaction, that's when you kind of say, okay, now we go from a diffusing to a critical incident debriefing. And fire is really good about diffusings. They do diffusings because of their, when they get called out to wildland fires and stuff like that, they'll do diffusings with it. And a lot of times that's really great to be able to see, how are our people really taking this? Ooh, things aren't going really good. So maybe we should start the critical incident debriefings. And I think that's, and Kevin, you want to come on real quick and talk about the difference between a diffusing and a debriefing?
Well, sure. And I mean, we have a set pattern that we do. Defusings are usually done as soon as the crews get back into the firehouse. And we do try to include dispatch and law enforcement if they'll get involved. And so we do those like immediately. Usually a debriefing is then done kind of a follow-up. And it's, at least 24 hours post-incident. Like you said, a sleep cycle, and also, like you said, trying to get that crew together again. It's unusual that the crews remain intact through their shifts with Mandos and what have you. I don't bring them out, but I refer to them all the time. I have two little cheat sheets that fit in my day planner. And yes, I still use a day planner, but I make sure that I'm following the debriefing steps, getting, having an introduction, stressing confidentiality, and then having people go through and let's state the facts. What happened? You mentioned earlier that filling in those blanks, in a really critical incident, they do have memory lapses or they didn't see the whole picture. So giving them kind of the 10,000-foot view of the whole incident, including the dispatcher. I've had captains who were livid with the dispatcher because they felt that the information that they were being given was all wrong and that screwed up the whole call and delayed response, et cetera. And then when they hear the dispatcher speak, that all goes away. It's literally diffused, all the anger at that point. But then, to follow up with that debriefing, just to say, okay, now, I stopped trying to say everybody good, because if you say that, everybody go, yeah, I'm good. But to literally say, how are you doing? And at the debriefing point, personally, I'll catch guys one-on-one, like one after another. I know you said you're good, but are you really good? Are you okay? You sleeping? Et cetera. So that's just kind of the way. On the backs of both of these, I have little tips and tricks that I taken right out of the CISM manuals from the classes that I've taken. So they're helpful. I don't bring them out. I definitely don't take notes ever. I may write down the first names because I'm old, so I forget easily. But especially names, I don't do names well. But just going around the room and having them hear everything, and then hopefully somebody at the table is going to say, and hopefully it's the person of authority, is going to say, I think all things considered, this went incredibly well. We were on scene quickly. Everybody knew what they were doing. Everybody did it well. We did everything we could do. And the fact that the ending is now what we wanted, the outcome, that wasn't on us. That was predetermined. And so, that's, and as a chaplain, we usually, in San Diego anyway, we usually lead the debriefing and defusing unless the clinician is available. And then we always make it a point on where we sit. So I'll sit with, wherever if I'm lead, but I'll ask the peer supporters to sit, on the door side of things, so that if somebody does get up and walk out, they follow them and say, hey, are you okay? Do you want to talk? They'll handle them separately one-on-one. And they're also then looking back at everybody's faces and kind of like trying to read expressions, et cetera. So I think that's pretty important as well, in my experience.
Perfect. Great.
You also mentioned that CAL FIRE, are going out on big vegetation fires. There's a third element that's the demob. So, at that point, that's a whole different cheat sheet. I've never had to do one of those. The R8 or the Ritz or DMOP. But that's letting them get a little rest, food and refreshment. And then, it's more information sharing on what's happening, what's going on, and maybe some tips on how to deal with any stress they're experiencing from the incident. And then, when you get back to your home department, reach out to your peer support and make sure the people who may be struggling get the help that they need.
Hey, Kevin, Jen asked if you're willing to share your cheat sheets with them. So if you are, would you go into the chat room and put your contact information so they can
The cheat sheets? Sure.
Yeah, the cheat sheets. Yeah, if you could do that.
Sure. I'll do it right now.
Okay, good. All right. Hey, Matt, you've been waiting. Go ahead.
Hey, no problem. Thank you. This is kind of more from my law enforcement partners, but how do you guys address any of the legal issues? And I know, Carl, you and I talked about this, and what I mean is if generally we try to have a debriefing within a couple sleep cycles. However, with the way that our lethal force encounters are investigated and done these days, is that our involved parties generally are not interviewed for at least a couple sleep cycles. So has anybody had any pushback, or has anybody had any dealings with, say, their POA attorneys or anything like that on having these debriefs? And I understand that we need to explain the scope of our discussions when we have these things, but I was just kind of curious about that. So I'll leave my email in the chat, but if anybody has any sort of policy on it or any sort of dealings with what their procedures are as far as not sort of muddying up an investigation, I would be curious to know about that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Do give Matt a chat about that, especially critical incident debriefings for OISs, I think was that topic. So and about how to do that, who's involved, and how do you get around some of those issues. So all right. Anybody else have any questions, concerns, comments?
Carl, I just wanted to reiterate what Matt was just talking about. Maybe you can discuss a little bit more too, but forgive me if I get the AB wrong, but Assembly Bill 1117, I believe, a couple years ago that went into effect, it gives us the confidentiality similar to you as a therapist and whatnot. And I believe that holds us confidential in criminal issues, things of that nature, versus if they do go civil, then we aren't as protected, to my understanding. But in criminal cases, to my understanding, if a judge subpoenas us for anything that was said, let's say in an OIS, because I know that can be, obviously a critical thing what's said, and obviously that officer needs to be able to express what's going on in their feelings. So a peer supporter has that ability to do that, and if a judge in a criminal case wants to subpoena them, then that can't happen. Now, the only problem I think is if it does go civil. I know in OIS, oftentimes I'm sure it can go to a civil hearing, so that might muddy it up a little bit. But at least criminally, I think we're protected as peers, so there's some safety in that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Ken. Well, thank you, everybody. I do appreciate everybody, taking time out of your busy days to be a part of this, and especially because your experiences and what's happened to you and being able to share them, invaluable. So I really appreciate that. It's good to see some familiar faces too. So God bless all of you. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can get a hold of me, and I will go in there and put my information. I'm going to put my email address. My email address is cmascarella, CMASCARELLA @gmail.com. And that's going in the chat right now. And so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, rebuttals, send them to me. Otherwise, Everybody have a great day. God bless you and take care. Bye-bye.